Okay, picking up where I left off, I thought I'd show you it in the raw before I do any more to it. I still have to work this end and that end to insert the hinges, but before I do that, this is the other tower in place, welded in, because these were yielded from an area on the deck lid, the stock deck lid, that was narrower. Obviously there was a gap here, so I had to make a piece up to fill in the center, so this flange continues on like that. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flange this up over here, and I'm going to be using a set of modified pliers, nice heavy dikes, side cutters, and you can see I welded a stop on them that's a 1/2 inch from the jaw. And if you look at the jaw, I've tapered one end down so that it's sharp, and this is where I'll basically go along and lift to give me a nice sharp edge right there. But it's substantial, has a lot of leverage, and you just got to go slow. Can't get ahead of yourself or you'll have cabbage, so you just got to kind of go back and forth until you get it 90 degrees where you can hammer it over with a hammer and dolly. Anyway, just thought I'd show you that if I hadn't showed you those already. No, I just thought I'd show you what it looks like when it's bent up at 90 and then dollied flat. I just use this piece of 1/2 inch metal and steel with a bevel cut on it here to kind of tuck in here and hammer that right along the edge with a body hammer, just to kind of sharpen that all up before I give it a final bend over. That kind of sharpens up the crease down here just a little bit. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better than just trying to fold it over and then just grinding it off, which is usually what I end up doing anyway, but this way you have to grind off less material. Anyway, I just thought I'd show you that. You can see it's bent up right there. Alright. Okay, so this is what it looks like hammered over. Just flattened out. Anyway, came out okay. Show you what it looks like from the top side, and let's go around to this side over here, and that finishes out that front edge pretty good. So now we have a Daytona deck lid. I just got to fit the hinges to it, and we'll be good to go. Alright, now I'm going to put these hinges in here, and I have to determine how far in or out they have to go and how high, what the relationship is going to be to the deck surface. So on a regular Daytona or on most clones, the easy way of doing it is you buy a set of hinges that are bent up for the Daytona, which is a longer set of hinges. And what that does is there's a pivot point back here for the stock deck lid, and they are extended to where they make up the difference in the length in order for you to clear this filled in sheet metal area here. This is not actually filled in, but anyway, you can see there's quite a bit of difference in the length from here to here, so your hinge has to come up and it has to clear. So there are these large loops that hook into the original deck location points, which look like this. In other words, this would be your stock gutter for your trunk, and this would be the front edge or the back edge of your Dutchman panel, and your front edge of your deck lid would be somewhere in this neighborhood. And these are where your hood or your deck pin or your deck hinges attached to this point here. So what I have to do is right now, first thing I'm going to do, just clamp a piece of sheet metal on here and basically get the relationship from this surface down to the center of this pin here, so that I can roughly position these and make sure this represents the top surface of the Dutchman panel. Make sure that this is in here at the right angle, because you remember we had to cut so much of this off. This could have been positioned in there differently. So anyway, this is going in a downhill direction now, and I've got to see if I've got this, if I could just attach it directly to this piece of sheet metal here, or if I have to tip it down and shim it down and put some spacers on there. That's the other one thing I have to determine. The other thing I have to determine is how far this pivot hole is back from here, which is the leading edge of the deck lid or the end of the Dutchman panel. So from here to here, I have to take that into consideration, and also the height off here. And that's all to make sure that it operates the same as a pair of stock hinges, which clears everything. As you can see right here, clears this gutter just fine. So I got a little bit of play there. I did something similar on my Daytona. I just basically attached them to the top, just welded them right to the top. But I'm going to put these underneath here and try to get them in there in a little bit more conventional method. Anyway, that's what I'm up to now. All right, what I've come to determine is that the top of this piece here is roughly a ½ inch down from the top surface of the Dutchman panel, and that the center of this hole is about 2 inches off the edge. So what I did was I put that in there, and it was obviously not at the right angle for this to fit up against there. So what I did was I slit the bottom of the hinge, and I'll weld it back up. I slit it once, and then I folded it, and then I slit it again, and then folded again, in order that now this will match the angle of the deck lid, that member right there, and put this at the right location relative to the height of the top of the Dutchman panel and the surface of the deck lid, and also in out relative to the edge of the deck lid. And I'll be able to, now this is, once it's welded up, I'll be able to just put this in there flush. Before it had a space like that, so now it's up against it really nicely. The other thing I've also done, I don't know if you can see this here, is I've drawn the pattern of the width of this hinge on the top side and marked where I'm going to drill my holes in the center of that. It's like 3/4 wide, but what I also did was I drew a center line on the deck lid first and measured off to here to make sure that both of these hinges go in parallel with the center line of the deck lid. Alright, once I've established that first hinge, I went ahead and dismounted the other hinge and cut it and bent it so that I have two identical hinges. Okay, on the hinges themselves, I went ahead and welded a couple of flange nuts right there. And in the deck lid, I put a couple of elongated holes here. That gives me just a little bit of adjustment front to back, just to dial everything in once I get it all set up. Anyway. Okay, so the last thing I want to do to smarten these hinges up a little bit is the normal way of attaching these hinges is over this little post here, this little pin, and then there's a little white metal clip that just kind of pushes down over top of it. That secures the hinge. But as you can see, it's just going through two pieces of sheet metal, and over the years, you know, it's kind of mushroomed out, a little loosey-goosey. So what I've done is I've got these half-inch steel sleeves, and I drilled them out to 5/16, so I got a nice snug fit with a 5/16 bolt. And when I come up with my hinge points, at least this part of it won't be wiggling around. I'll just weld these in, and that'll make for a nice tight fit with a bolt right through it. Anyway, that's the last thing I'm going to do to get these hinges a little bit better than the way they were set up in the first place. Okay, so now it's ready to work with. I got these in and tweaked these around where they would be as vertical as possible, because this was pretty soft and it'll move, so these would move around pretty good. So it was pretty important to add this piece of 70 thousandths down here to plate this in. You're limited as to how small you can do this closure if you want to get these hinges out again, which I do. So what I have to do is unbolt them and then flop them to the side to get them out. But anyway, that way I got the biggest gusset that I could, because you can't pull them straight out, especially with the welded nuts on the bottom side. At any rate, that makes them considerably stronger when you have that plate in there to finish the closeout. But I'm not going to do any more sprucing on this as far as putting the epoxy in or anything like that, because who knows what I'll run into as far as interference or anything like that. So before I get crazy finishing this out, I'm going to finish out this closure here with guttering and set this in place and put my hinge points in and get that all squared away. So that's what's next. Alright, without the full tail panel in here, there's a lot. This is still pretty flexible here. I mean, I can move it up and down a little bit. And I want to stabilize the distance between these 2 points. I don't want these quarter panels to roll in because they're unsupported. Normally your tail panel, once it's in, it's going to be welded all the way around this perimeter, and there's no way for the quarter panels at that point to roll in. Right now though, I've just got this thin piece here. And while it's pretty rigid, I'm still able to manipulate these almost 1/4 inch in and out, which I've got to stabilize that. So I'm not ready to build this panel yet with taillights. I'm not ready to pull the other car apart and get the taillights out, do all that jazz just at this moment. So what I need to do is I need to create a spreader that will stabilize it all the way out to here. And what I've decided to do is take this piece of 1 inch by 1 inch tubing that I had originally as a rough spreader, and I've made a couple of V-cuts. The first V-cut, of course, is to match the deck lid in this direction, side to side. Then, of course, there's a house top in this deck lid also that goes in this direction. Okay, so once I've got this direction welded up, I set it on top here, cut it again, except for the bottom member, and then push it down until it matches the deck lid. So I have this thing V-shaped in 2 directions. Now, when it gets to the taillight section, or the ends, the quarter panel section, it kind of flattens out. So I'll have to fit this up underneath there, and then cut it and move it into position, and tack it into position, and weld it all up, clean it up, paint it, and then install it. So that's what I'm up to now. All right, first I spotted it in this 1 by 1 inch piece at the top of the bed here, and then I took this quarter power spreader and I kind of just gently roll these quarters just out another 1/8 of an inch, a 1/16 of an inch on either side to just give me a little more breathing room at the back of this seam. And then you can see this is bent towards me, and I just tacked it here to prevent these from rolling back in. Anyway, that's what I'm up to now. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that seam there. That breathes just enough on both sides here. So I've used these bar magnets here to bring both surfaces up so that they're even. I start out with like a 1/4 inch piece of material in the bed to try and get it up pretty close to it, and then use the magnets to bring it up the rest of the way. I like to put it up here in this, where this flip is over here. The quarter panel is slightly lower here, but rather than fill the deck lid up with mud in the future here, these two surfaces are really nice. You have to fill in with mud in this little gully, which has got a lot of irregularities in it anyway. It's no big deal, rather than load the deck lid up with mud. Anyway, I was trying to figure out what I had in the way of a piece of 1/2 inch material, and it dawned on me I had these things. These harken back to the days when stock cars used to be built with templates, and they had different colors on the templates. If it was green, you had a 1/2 inch clearance. This is usually only in the area of like the Lexan or the glass, because in the sun that would expand and contract. So that was a hard tolerance to gauge, or excuse me, to keep. The blue was 1/4 inch, the yellow was 1/8 of an inch, and 1/16 of an inch was where it had to fit red. In other words, with the template sitting on the car, you couldn't get this gauge block under these various areas depending on the color that was on the edge of the template. But I was looking for a piece of 1/2 inch, and that's a perfect little gauge block for getting my deck lid where I want it, which it's not exactly what the caps are. Caps are a little bit less than this, but I'm going to be manufacturing this edge here as opposed to putting one of those aluminum caps on here. Anyway, on to the next step. Alright, I went ahead and just put a little tab here just to stabilize this, make sure it didn't shift around. Even though these magnets are pretty good, one little bump and then you got to start all over. So the reason I did that is I wanted to make sure that we were the right distance off of the existing Dutchman panel from here to here. Everything was good. I wanted to make sure that my hinges, you remember I put slotted holes, I wanted to make sure that they were the proper distance from the edge. I also wanted to make sure that they were not twisted, leaning, kicked over, that they were both lined up with the center line of the car in this direction, and that they also were vertical as far as this member here. I wanted to make sure that this was as straight up and down as I could possibly get it. There's a tiny bit of slop in those holes, so I was able to steer them so that they were the right distance off the edge here on both sides, the right distance off the edge of the deck lid front to rear, and then also vertically aligned. Alright, I'm working on a crossbar here made out of 049 wall 1 inch by 1 inch steel tubing, and I'm just working on the shape of it. It doesn't need to be shaped, but I'm going to use it as a de facto support for the sheet metal that'll go across in this enclosure over here. So I'm trying to arc it the same as the deck lid here. Like I said, this could go straight across for what its intended purpose is. The intended purpose is to create a place to bring 2 tabs off that can through bolt to these hinge points. So this will get welded up in here, and the sheet metal is going to come across here, and of course this will all be hidden underneath of the plug for the fastback. But at the same time, it's just nice to add another member of support. The sheet metal will go over and we'll weld right to this piece also to stiffen up this a little bit more, give it a little bit more strength. Never hurts. Anyway, you can see I've got a little bit of an arc that I'm working on putting into this thing so that it comes up to the shape. There's a pretty simple way of bending pipe. You just get a section of 2 different size pipes, gap it at the bottom so that you have a variety of things that you can use, and basically just put it in there and lift up on it a little bit. You got plenty of leverage if it's got length, and then you just slowly twist something like 049 wall. It's very easy to shape this, so mild steel, it's no problem for this simple device. Alright, so I've cut out 4 ears out of 1/4 inch by 1.5 inch cold rolled steel flat stock, and I cut out a notch for them to go around the 1 inch by 1 inch bar. There's a tab here that'll get a drill hole, and so what I'm doing now is I've welded them together so that I can grind them all together and get them to look a little uniform, and then I'll be able to, since they're all welded together, just be able to pilot hole and drill these out on the press, so I get a nice square hole in these tabs. Anyway, just thought I'd show you that. Alright, so I've got my these hinge ears now welded to this bar, just the tops and the backs, and I did run into a little bit of an issue on this side over here. This was tipped up, and so what I did was I loosened the shaft that goes into the deck lid. I just loosened it up until these drop down to where they fit right. Now what I'm going to have to go and do is at the bottom of this loop here on the bottom side, I'll slice it with the cutoff wheel, and just part of the way through in order that I could once again tightened the bar back up and then re-welded so it's got the proper angle. While both hinges are identical, the tabs are identical, everything's in the proper location, the stamped sheet metal, because I'm bolting it to the flat side, if it's off just a little bit on either side, and there's no reason for it to be exactly the same, because as you remember, these normally bolt through the side and you have adjustment because you could move them up and down this way, side to side. Now I'm basically locked into that flat surface where these two hinges go into. I'll show you from the underneath side here. Where this bolts in over here, okay, if you tighten this bolt down, it rocks the whole hinge up, kicks it up, because this surface is slightly out of plane with that surface over there. Since I started with that one to make my tabs, when I came over to this side, the tabs didn't quite line up because this hinge is rocked up a little bit higher, so it was pushing up out of the hole here. So I just loosen this just a tick here, loosen this a lot, allow this to move up. Now what I'll do is I will cut this on the bottom side and allow this piece, I'll tighten this back up, and this will close up the gap here, and hopefully that corrects the situation, because it'll basically rectify itself with everything locked in. This is locked in, everything's locked in right now. So give it a try, see what happens. Okay, so I cut it here. It didn't want to pivot at that point, so I went ahead and I pulled it out. I cut it again at this angle, and I opened up the angle a little bit to get it to bend down more in this direction here. I fit it back up in there, adjusted it to the right angle. I didn't cut all the way through this side here, so that these two pieces would once again meet up without any kind of stress in the piece. Now I'll go back in there and I'll weld this piece of the hinge back together with this tightened up to the deck lid, so that it doesn't pull the deck lid into a twist. Alright, so I went under there and I welded the bottom sides of these tabs and finished welded up most of what I could get to on that hinge. So everything's set into place. So this is pretty much what we have now. It's open it up on it. You can see where I had to weld it back together here. It's already been welded together up in that top section over there, and so now they both operate pretty smoothly. And like I said, the only downfall on this method is the fact that you're locked into whatever this is stamped into, this angle. So I had to make the correction, like I said, in this area right here. I had to pull this completely out, cut it again, and bend it until it complied. That would be this side. And tightened it up, made sure there was nothing in a bind before I tacked it all back together. And now it's doing what it's supposed to do here. My thumb out of there. It's surprisingly heavy, even though it's shortened up quite a bit. But the gaps are where I want them on both sides over here. And like I said, there is still a little adjustment if you needed to, forward and back, but our up and down and our plane and everything like that, that's kind of locked in. That's probably the only negative, because with a regular stock hinge you have the ability to adjust this plane here even more, but this is a 101, so we don't have to worry about that. This is not production, so we can lock it in right where it needs to be. Anyway, on to the next thing. Alright, one thing I forgot to mention about the bolt up is the fact that when I put these ears on, I through bolted it and then tightened up the bolt, and then I spotted them and welded them in to minimize the clearance in here. You remember I put a sleeve in there, welded a sleeve in there so that it's tied up against the edges of the sleeves on both sides. Then when I put the final bolt in, it's on there with a nylock. So there's a nylon locking bolt there so that I could tighten it up and then back it off a quarter of a turn so that it has a little bit of, in other words, so it's loose enough so that it'll operate, but there's no slop in it. Okay, it's time to start on replicating this up against this. So obviously this is convoluted piece, so I'm going to have to break it up into 3 parts. First part is going to be a small flange coming from here down to this, which is about 5/8 of an inch by 1 inch, which I've made up here. This enables me to shrink it and stretch it to get the arc that goes over top of the deck lid, and it also gives me the ability to put the arc in it that goes in this direction over here. So this is what it looks like tight up against it. Of course, I'll space it off, and this little step that I've put in here, normally if this was going to be exposed sheet metal, something like on top of the body, I wouldn't step it, I would butt weld it. But I'm going to bring the closure panel from here and lay it right on top of here. This will just be spot welded every 1.5 inches, but that's all going to be underneath of the window plugs, so there's no need to worry about. The reason you don't want to overlap a joint like this is even after the car's been body worked and painted, because it's a double stack like this. You'll see a lot of guys putting these quarter panel repair panels on. They leave a little bit of a ledge here, and then they step it, and then they just mud over it, or they put epoxy over it. And what happens is in the sunlight over time, because it's a double stack right there, the expansion rate is a little bit different, and you'll start to see that line start to telegraph through there. So butt welding is a real pain in the butt, as you well know, but a lot of butts there. The situation is you don't want to do it where you got anything exposed, but it's a very good solution if you've got something like this, and you don't want to put a lot of heat into this because you don't want it warping up, so you welding it every 1.5 inches is not going to hurt it. So first things first, I got to paint this out with some weld through primer, and then I've got to get this in place right here. Also, let me just say that the easiest way to do this is to get a 1971 Dodge Charger front trunk gutter, if you can find one. They used to reproduce them. I don't see them listed anymore, but you would put that in first, and then you would cut your deck lid front shape here to match that. It's got an arc that goes in this direction here, but I can't source one of those, so I'm going to have to make my own, and this is how I'm going to start. Alright, so this piece is welded in at both ends. I used magnets to make sure that it's up as high as it needs to go, so it's flush with the top of the deck lid. And then I put these temporary sheet metal tabs on there to hold the spacing all the way across and keep it flush with the top. Alright, I'm going to use the forward section of the deck skin that I cut off the deck lid as the filler panel for back here. Obviously it's short, but I've calculated into that 1 inch over here will give me my space back. Show you a trick here. This is the step where the sheet metal's got to fall down into, so I want to trim this panel off to fit into the step. So what I've done is I've ran this piece of yellow 3/4 inch tape right along the edge, and I'll show you what I'm going to do next. Alright, with the panel in place, what I've done is I've taken some more tape, and basically you can see I've run it on the back edge here. Now this front edge is your cut line. It's important to notice that if you're doing this method, use the same roll of tape, because these are cut at a variety of widths. They're not exactly 3/4 of an inch, so if you want to transfer a line accurately, use the same roll. So this is lined up like this. I'll finish taping it out here, marking it off, trim it up, and it'll be pretty darn close. Alright, that's what it looks like all welded up. Now I'm going to have to cut those tabs, which may cause that this rim over here to fall a little bit, in which case when I open the deck lid I'm going to have to add some adjusters, some temporary adjusters, tack them to that and raise that back up with some temporary stopping in order to hold it to this arc over here until I complete the rest of the structure. Alright, this next step is not entirely necessary, but it's a matter of personal preference, because I like this bed to look more original equipment. So The original Daytonas, they just took this front gutter and just ran it straight across. So it was a square cut here, basically. What I did was I recovered the corners that came off the original trunk gutter, and I sliced it down the center so that I could reposition the angle of it so it was heading in the right direction to follow through along this edge over here. And then I spliced the two pieces together, and then I mended it in. It also helps, instead of having to if you have put a square cut, you've got to miter this bead, which is not a big deal. But in other words, this is your trunk seal. Normally on your OE chargers that are not modified like this wraps around in a complete circle until the splice is right here in the center, down at the bottom. And by putting the corner in like this, it enables me to have this opportunity to just do a complete wrap all the way around with this seal. It's just personal preference. It's a little extra work, but I think it looks better this way than the way they put it together originally, which was just kind of a square cut. Anyway, that's what I'm up to. Now I got to do this side. All right, so the next part of the trunk gutter, as you can see, I've drilled out for plug welds all along here, and this piece here is shaped not quite 90-degree angles. There's a little downhill slope on the top, and then there's a 90 at the bottom. And it was going to be a little bit of an effort to try and shape this, because you can only shrink this edge and this edge, but it also had to make an arc over. But as I started just kind of hand shape it, even before I started shrinking and stretching it and just leaning it over a curved pipe, it started arcing in both directions when I leaned on it. So I just wanted to go that way, so it gave me the arc without having to shrink or stretch it. For the most part, I had to do just a little bit of tuning up on the edges, but at any rate, this is what this is going to look like, and it's going to fit in just up under here like that, and it will complete that run from side to side. You can also see my adjustable stobs I have over here for holding the whole mess up until I get this all assembled. Anyway, gotta weld this in now. It might be a bit confusing to see this with all of these ground out tacks here, but if you look at it here, you've got I've stair-stepped it down one more time here. This piece here wraps, it creates the bottom of the trunk gutter, and it goes up behind this piece that came out, so it's welded through here. Everything's been coated both sides so that there's weld through primer on both sides of each one of these channels. The final piece that's going to go in is this piece right here, which is a Z-shaped flange, and this completes this creates this upper ledge here for the trunk seal to go on. Now, where I've been going under each piece over here progressively, this one here will sit right on top, just like that, and it'll finish the gutter out. This gives me one seam right here to seal up over here with epoxy, and then another seam right here to seal up with epoxy. If I did it underneath in this fashion, then I'd have to kind of blindly try and get the epoxy in on this inner edge right over here. So by putting it up on top like this, I can see this seam and do a neater job of sealing up this one seam, and then that'll complete the trunk gutter, and I'll paint it all out so you can see it a little bit better. Alright, I just hit it with a little bit of primer to make it all uniform so it's easier to see what's going on here. You can see this is the what the finished track looks like all the way along there. This is the piece that I was basically replicating, and I had to break it up into about 4 pieces to get that to happen. And so anyway, that's where we are with that. We'll just loosen this up, drop this down. Okay, so I just hit that again with a little bit of self-etching primer there so it's all uniform, so I can see how everything looks as far as how it all decks out now that it's locked in. Anyways, that's that. Moving on to the next thing. Alright, well, apparently the next thing I got to do is scavenge some bits off this car, so before I can do that, there's a few things I needed to unplug to see if the car would stay running, because I'm probably not going to go back into the car, and as you know, there's lots of stuff that's interconnected on these cars, so slowly going through the process of things I might have to unplug. One of them that was worrying to me was this huge, looked like a huge pod, but there's actually not a whole lot going on in here. Just a rain sensor on the windshield, and that's about it. I'm guessing that there's some sort of a distance detector, some kind of laser radar or something like that mounted somewhere in the front of the car for the active cruise control. So we'll have to find out where that is later when we take the front end off, I suppose. I was told that it's probably up here in the windshield, but it doesn't appear to be. Anyway, so that's good, because we really can't mount this whole mess. You see all of this in that tiny little windshield. It's going to be in that car over there. So that's that. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching this one, and we'll see you on the next one.